The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we're gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise to get what we want, we got to organize.
Welcome to the Pantsula Podcast, sponsored by the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. My name is Evan, and I'm here with my comrade Sadiq. We are part of the Kazi Work Study Circle, and also we are a Pan-Africanist party in which we define Pan-Africanism as the total unification and liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. The A-APRP was founded in 1968 by Kwame Nkrumah, who published the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, in which he spoke of Africans building the party through the Nkrumahism Toureism ideology for the purpose of Pan-Africanism. Speaking of ideology of the party, our guests today speak a bit on both. Our guest will be Toks Adewale, formerly known as Michael W. Williams. And before we get into speaking more about him, as we always do, we want to honor our ancestors, because without the work they have put in, we want to be where we are, and always have lessons on where we were as a people and how we can move forward. In this episode, we'll honor Marcelino dos Santos and Andre Boulouin, which Kwame and Sadiq will speak more about.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate that. So, just as he stated, we're going to honor two of our ancestors. One being, like he stated, Marcelino dos Santos, who was a poet and revolutionary, who was one of the founding members of Frelimo, which is the Mozambican Liberation Front, in 1962, and served as the party's deputy president from 1969 to 1977. He also worked closely with Eduardo Madeleine, who was another founding member of Frelimo, and brought the idea of creating an African front against Portuguese colonialism. Dos Santos actually, transitioned pretty recently back in 2020, so we definitely want to honor him. Other person, as Evan stated too as well, was Andre Boulouin, who was also a revolutionary from the Central African Republic, which is now known as the Congo, who was launched into political struggle after the untimely death of her child. She moved to Guinea back in the 1950s to fight for the independence of Guinea alongside the late great Ahmed Sekou Toure and the PDG. She returned back to the Congo after working very closely with the PDG to assist Patrice Lumumba in organizing Congolese women in the Congo. So bigs up to those ancestors and all the work that they've done for us in the past. We wouldn't be here without the work that they've done. So, as Evan also stated, we also have here Toks Adewale. He's an academic and former professor at Webster University, also a former head of African Studies at Simmons College. He's the founder of the Nkrumaist Review, Pan-African Perspectives on African Affairs, which he edited for 10 years. Also a longtime organizer with the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. He's also the author of 3 books, one being, which we're going to talk about today, the Pan-African Imperative, revisiting Kwame Nkrumah's vision for African development, which is this book I'm holding up here. Go get you a copy. And he's also the author of Pan-Africanism and Zionism, Political Movements and Polarity. And lastly, the Pan-Africanism and Annotated Bibliography. We want to definitely thank you for setting time aside to meeting with us today, Toks Adewale, and speaking with us. One of the first questions I have in just getting this book and actually reading it, I guess, what drove you to write this book, essentially?
Great. Well, I'm most grateful for the invitation and for the opportunity to dialogue and discuss with you guys. So with that question, I've been working on it for a while, and then this COVID-19 provided the opportunity for me to kind of finish what I was working on. But I wanted to provide some. The goal was to create a summary or to condense Nkrumah's works, because Nkrumah, has written about 15 books, and it's about 5 books of speeches. And so it's asking a lot for people to read all that, and so my goal was to try to summarize what Nkrumah had to say. That was one. to show its continued relevance. Nkrumah was reigning up until the early 1970s. He passed in 72. And so it's 52 years, and so assuming his last one was 1970. And so I wanted to try to just give it a contemporary sense of its relevance, because it's still relevant, but I wanted to somehow show that how it's relevant to the current condition that we're faced, and then just to try to show some distinction between what so many of the so-called pundits, this neoliberalism that dominates the literature. When you look at what students are studying, young students, high school, but especially at the university level, it's all based on this neoliberal philosophy of so-called democratic capitalism and all this kind of thing. And so I wanted to try to provide some alternatives. So those were the three major things that was driving me to write this work.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that. So what you saying that actually it brought to mind what you saying about a lot of the neoliberal pundits coming out and talking about democratic socialism or like democratic capitalism. Essentially, you also have people who may be on the left, right, who adhere to like orthodox Marxism, or other people who are part of like African revolutionary spaces and maybe Garveyites who deem as like, Nkrumahism, Marxism is like, just a European concept. So if you could kind of just build on what Nkrumahism is and those rebuttals from those two different spaces, essentially.
Yeah, it's very African. I mean, for us, the world, the world is universal and then it's particular. And so Nkrumah used a universal method of analysis, that's dialectical and historical materialism, and applied it to the unique African condition. That's how I see it. There's certain universal principles, like everything is connected. Nothing exists in isolation. That's one of the principles of dialectics. And that matter, it exists independent of our ideas. These are just basic universal principles. And so Marx and others, Lenin and others, Mao, they didn't apply, they used the same method of analysis, which is universal, but they applied it to their particular condition. And so how I see Nkrumahism is that this was an effort on the part of Nkrumah to apply universal principles to particular conditions. And when you do that, you come up with different ideological, theoretical propositions, not necessarily in contradiction to others, but just that are relevant to our condition. And so that's how I see Nkrumah. And, Garvey and others, when they're at their best, they're also applying the same universal principles. Malcolm, for that matter, when Malcolm says, for example, that you can't understand what's happening in Mississippi unless you understand what's happening in the Congo. That's very dialectical, it's showing that nothing exists in isolation. And so I think what we're saying with Nkrumah is that he just, more than anybody, took these universal principles and applied them to the conditions that face Africa and African people. And so that's how I see Nkrumahism. Yeah, it's both universal and it's particular to us. Yeah, I wouldn't expect a Chinese to be an Nkrumahist or a Vietnamese to be an Nkrumahist. Ho Chi Minh did the same thing for the people in Vietnam, and Mao did the same thing. For years, they were saying Maoism. And, China, honestly, China wouldn't be China today if it wasn't for Maoism, honestly. Yeah, so that's how I see it, yeah.
What would you say about, I guess, like Marxists who say that Nkrumahism is some form of revisionism or deviates completely from a Marxist line? I guess, what are some of your takes? I know you outlined some of those, but if you could kind of dive deeper into people who may say that or feel like it's not, it's the antithesis of Marxism.
Yeah, people say that, but I don't see it. I think it has to do with, deviation has negative connotations, but there's certainly we have taken positions that are not typically orthodox Marxist. See, Marxism is both, for me, method and theory. Marx took the principles, dialectical and historical materialism, and applied them to the concrete conditions that he faced in Western Europe in the mid to late 19th century. So that's fine. He did a great job, but naturally you'll have differences in theory. The method is the same, but he was applying that method to the mid late 19th century. So by all means, we'll have theoretical, you can call them deviations or differences, because our condition was different. We were a continent of people that have been divided, and our people displaced and sent all over the world. And so that by all means we'll have different theories. And so one of the issues has to do with identity. For all of my years in the U.S. as an adult, as an Nkrumaist, Marxists were always having problems with us saying that we were African, and even the concept of nation. There's a Stalinist definition of nationhood that includes, a number of aspects that most Marxists use. Stalin talked about nation being a common territory, common language, common psychological makeup, culture, and common economic life. And then Nkrumah says, no, it's the economic life that determines what makes a nation, and things will derive from that. So that's based on our condition and our reality. And so if we deviate, fine. It's just natural, because conditions, everything is the same and everything is different. And so it's our differences that will, by all means, create different theories. So I just want to reinforce this point that Marxism is both method and theory. And Marx, for example, if you read Marx in the Communist Manifesto and Engels, they argued, and it was a good theory in its time and space, that revolution was going to occur in Germany and Great Britain in particular, because the contradictions of capitalism were the most intense there. But it didn't. Not that Marx was incorrect. The first socialist revolution occurred in Russia, in a country whose contradictions were not what Marx was describing. It was mostly rural and agrarian. But again, not that Marx was incorrect, but we're all a product of our space and time. And if you read the Communist Manifesto and Marx, that revolution was going to come in Germany and in this thing, Great Britain, but it did not. So theoretically, you're going to have differences based on space, conditions, and time.
Yep, and just to clarify for anyone that might not be familiar with the term revisionism, revisionism just means that it's for anyone that simply use the Marxist terms, for people who, or organizations that have a different view of basically the definition of what Marx used as far as the science of dialectical historical materialism, labor theory of value, and so forth, though, and people who expect that may have a little different things on that. So it's just for clarification for anyone that's unsure.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, we just can't be slaves of other people. We have our own mind and our own reality and our own condition. And our thinking has to be nourished by our own conditions, our own space, our own time.
Yeah. I definitely appreciate that. And I definitely agree with a lot of those sentiments. But with writing this book, I was digging into it, and earlier I see you out, talk about the early forms of Pan-Africanism, essentially. And in the past, in other books I've read, I tend to see people who normally start Pan-Africanism with, the slave revolts, primarily, in Haiti or like in Brazil. And here I see you didn't really take that stance. If you can kind of elaborate on where you think Pan-Africanism originated and, just the transition it's taken since then.
Yeah, great question. Well, I wish I could take credit for none of this. Nkrumah, I'm just summarizing. And even in my earlier works, I also dated the origin of Pan-Africanism with the transatlantic slave trade. But it was actually Kwame Ture who I first heard talk about it originated in Africa. And then when I do a revision of this same book, I got to find a way to give him credit, because if you look at that book, it is based on, scholarly articles and that kind of thing. But this was a speech. This was a talk Kwame gave. He was in Ghana in around 94, 95. The Nation of Islam was having its Savior's Day in Ghana. And, Farrakhan, they all were there. And Kwame was there. And so we got to talk and stuff. But he gave a talk. And that's the first time I had heard of that before. Because we were all kind of just slave trade, and Du Bois and the Congresses and Marcus Garvey. But so he put that out there without, the kind of detail. And so I just started studying it. And so, yeah, it makes perfect sense that, there's a natural evolution from what you call clan, tribe, family, nation, continent. I mean, it's not universally applicable in all cases and all times, but that's what you see. People, and we ourselves were moving in that direction in Africa. And the nation state process is never it rarely is it peaceful and you sit down and figure it out. It's normally through one group that's more powerful and has access to water and resources and overtake other smaller nations and swallow them up. And so we were going through that process. If you look at Africa, we were just going through large groups with swallowing up other groups, create larger nation states, and it was interrupted. And so the point I think Kwame was making, and I think we should understand, is that had Africa not been interrupted with transatlantic slave trade, with colonialism, we wouldn't have these 54, 55 states that we have today. It's hard to say, 14, 15, 8, 9, 7. But I know in Ghana here, the Ashanti, that process was disrupted by the British imperialists. If you look at the Ashanti, they were just creating a large nation state. The Ashanti, it reached into Togo, it reached into Burkina Faso, and it reached into, what's the other one? La Cote d'Ivoire. And they just arrested it. And same with this Shaka Zulu and the people in South Africa. So yeah, that's how I think we have to understand it. That we were creating large nation states, and Africa, more likely than not, had been left alone, would have evolved into. And so that's Pan-African, but it's not the kind of nation state. Again, if you look at Europe, again, it was by force. That's the point I want to really make. Human beings, they kind of forced almost all nation states, Germany, Italy, Spain. They were smaller ethnic groups, and they became, and that's the same thing. If you look at the Benin Empire, Europe, that's how it. So that's what was going on in Africa. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. So I guess with that, given that, it started in Africa, and obviously it got intruded on, apparently, with the evolution of the slave trade and the various movements that have taken place over time. If you kind of can, I know you kind of said some of this a little bit earlier, but if you kind of can expand on, okay, after that period, and we have other Africans within the diaspora, C.L.R. James, Henry Sylvester Williams, so forth and so on, who've helped build, some forms of Pan-Africanism. If you kind of could talk about Nkrumah's line on continental unity and, the other forms of continental unity leading up to that, Garvey's position on it versus Padmore's versus so forth and so on. So if you kind of could just walk us through that.
Yeah. So, so the point I was making earlier is it's just the seeds, the roots, the roots of Pan-Africanism. Because as I see it, the ultimate goal of Pan-Africanism is a united Africa. And so if you look at the roots of that concept, you go there. But certainly the diaspora has made a major contribution because from the 20th century going, you have kind of organized Pan-Africanism. This one that I was referring to is not organized, there's no program, agenda. It's just the natural evolution of human beings. Because human beings, and it's a basic concept we have to really get across, human beings, they serve themselves better when they are organized on a larger level, when they are organized and disciplined into nation states. A nation state can better serve its people, food, clothing, and shelter, when it's organized along national lines, regardless of size. Yeah, regardless of size. So you can find a nation state. It may be smaller in size, but it can defeat a tribe, even if the tribe is larger in number, because of the level of discipline. You got a division of labor. A nation state comes with, an army, and that's all they do. People in the army, they just, that's their specialization. Whereas, somebody that's a tribe, the people who are fighting are farmers, they're traders, they're doing everything. And they don't have that level of specialization. So they may be larger in number. That's why many of the Native Americans couldn't defeat this nation state that came, because of what the nation state represents. And so the organized Pan-Africanism in the 20th century, you'll find a common thread of the notion that, African people are one, and you have to unite the continent. And Marcus Garvey in particular was excellent at that. He was a great writer in his articles, and he came in the Negro world, but even poems. He was just always promoting that. That's where Nkrumah got it from. One Africa, united Africa. We need a common nation. That whole thing of common nation, Garvey picked it up, and Garvey influenced Padmore, even though there were problems between Padmore and Garvey, and C.L.R. James and Garvey. Garvey was the ultimate nationalist, and these guys, understood socialism a little more. But that whole concept of one Africa, we have to give Garvey a lot of credit. And because early on, even Nkrumah was seeing West Africa. Later, through, his interaction with Padmore and others, they saw one Africa. And the other thing is that the diasporans, because, we removed from Africa, we don't see the differences, the distinctions, the tribal. And so naturally, we saw Africa as one. I think it's either, what's his name? Either James or Padmore talk about that thing. Because, me, a diasporan, I've been in Ghana for almost 30 years. And it's being in Ghana where I can see the difficulty, the ethnic, contradictions that was, many cases were reinforced by, imperialism. But in the diaspora, because of the way they undermine our culture, we just see Africa as one. And so that concept really come from the diaspora. Why can't we unite? When people in the diaspora don't understand it. When you get on the ground, those ethnic things matter. So if you look at the history of Pan-African outside of Africa, I think the concept of one Africa, united Africa, is what is one of the contributions that the diaspora made to the discussion, and Garvey in particular, but also Padmore. Back to your, part of your question was Padmore, saw kind of the regionalism. He was for African unity, but he wanted to go through the regional direction. And Nkrumah was not a regionalist. And these regionalists can slow us up sometime. I wish, for example, we create some countries would create a United States of Africa in the way that Ghana, Guinea, Mali were doing. You don't have to share boundaries. It's economy. And so he was a regionalist, and then because maybe his wife was Jewish, and and he had that kind of anti-Arab kind of thing. And Du Bois also, they just saw so-called Black Africa, so they were limited, in how they saw united Africa. Whereas Nkrumah saw the whole Africa as ours, not just so-called sub-Saharan or so-called Black Africa. But again, that notion of one Africa, United States of Africa, I think it comes largely from the diaspora. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And speaking of which, I know in the intro they talked about Nkrumahism Toureism ideology. So could you speak more about how Kwame Ture influence? And I also know that you spoke about CLR James's wife, Selma James. So want to speak more about like the role of Nkrumahism Toureism as far as the role of women in Pan-Africanism. So because I know that as much as we do want to appreciate the role of Kwame Nkrumah, of Garvey, Du Bois, and Ture, and so forth, that I understand that women and gender oppressed or marginalized gender sexual people like play a role in, because if we're all African People's Revolutionary Party, it means we have like all Africans, and especially that they're given a way that that Africans have been proletarianized, and ways things come out as a result of colonization, that a large part of who are involved in or basically pushed off the land or forced into work are indeed like women, and as people of marginalized gender. Speak more on that as well.
Right.
So this,
oh, sorry. I don't see any contradiction. I mean, not contradiction, but Secretary to me reaffirms, confirms all what Nkrumah has to say. It's just that, Nkrumah has much to say on women, but also Secretary. And so that one is very important. And he has some wonderful writings on just women. And Nkrumah has kind of statements which are absolutely correct and very comprehensive. But Secretary, I think, has a whole book or chapter kind of on it. And so it helps to illuminate and elaborate on that question. And also on religion. One of the beautiful things, that's for Africans, religion is everything for us. And it's good and bad, actually. But the fact that Secretary was a Muslim, but yet saw no contradiction between being a Muslim and a devout Muslim and being a Pan-Africanist. I think that's another contribution that he makes, Secretary makes on religion and then on women. Secretary is cold-blooded on women. And, that's why we have to read it. For me, you have this thing called Marxism-Leninism. And so we have to make a difference. Ours is not kind of like Nkrumahism Toureism, because they're in the same era. Marx was looking at contradictions late 20th century and 19th century, and Lenin met a different set of contradictions. As imperialism, capitalism had become late moribund and had started becoming imperialistic and moving outside its borders. And so that's why I think that Marxism-Leninism, whereas Secretary and Kwame Nkrumah met the same thing, neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And so it's a different kind of thing. I think Toureism was brought in maybe to reinforce or say, here's another great thinker. But you could do the same thing. The people who Nkrumah, I think, synthesized, assimilated, refined, extended, reinforced all what not only Secretary said, but what Malcolm said and so many others said, but in the same period. And so that's how I see Ture and Nkrumah. I don't see what Ture added to. He reinforced and confirms. And so we got another voice, some more writings which confirm what Nkrumah had to say. So that's how I see it. That's why these parties, we mentioned earlier before we started the PRSP, they're Nkrumaist, and A-APRP is Nkrumaist Toureism. It's absolutely no difference, because the people in the PRSP, which say they're just Nkrumaists, love and adore Secretary and read Secretary, because Secretary, and when you read him, you just say, "Wow, he's such a brilliant guy." But it's just almost maybe semantics kind of, It's this identical ideology.
Essentially, what is, from an Nkrumah standpoint, what role do women play, you know, in the struggle for African liberation and, you know, unity?
Yeah, they're pivotal. You know, over half the population, and no revolution can succeed without it. And their role has been phenomenal. The unfortunate thing is that they haven't received the amount of credit that they deserve, and largely because they've been more foot soldiers. You know, because of sexism, patriarchy, the men have often taken the role as chairman and president, and vice president, and director, that kind of thing. And so we end up looking at these persons. But honestly, if you involve an organization, you know, there's so many things involved in organization, and women have played that role as just the backbone, the foundation. You know, I had my mother-in-law once told me that she's a Baptist, you know, in the church, and she said she made it was the point, and it's fairly relevant. She says that the women raise the money and the men decide how to spend it in the church. It's the same kind of thing, you know. And she's not political or anything. She was just telling me off the cuff over a dining room table once. My first mother-in-law said that women raise the money in the church and men decide how to spend it. And so it's the same kind of thing. The women have just provided that contribution, and so. Nkrumah, Secretary, they all kind of saying the same thing. We can't do anything without women. They're just brilliant, and their contributions have been phenomenal. Just, again, they just haven't received their credit. It's a Garvey movement, I think, more than almost any one of the first organizations that really spotlighted the role of women, because they were so phenomenal. In fact, Marcus Garvey's second command was a woman. I forget her name. I think Vincent. Oh, I don't have it in front of me. But she was a very powerful woman. And, you know, the Garvey women were just doing everything, especially in healthcare with nurses and all. So you just can't talk enough about women. That's why, you know, because they suffer from this triple oppression. It becomes difficult to get them involved sometimes, because they under such oppression from not only the system of capitalism and imperialism, but it impacts men to oppress women. Our own African men have served to and continue to oppress women, and so it becomes difficult for them to be involved sometimes. But when you get them, I was just listening to some sisters in Burkina Faso and Mali and in the party and in Senegal. It's some bad sisters, man. I don't know if you know Inim and some other sisters. Yeah. Man, they some bad sisters, boy. I tell you, yeah, they some bad sisters.
Inim is a cold sister. She's doing a lot of great work on the ground in Burkina Faso.
Oh my goodness, our future is set with sisters like that.
Definitely.
Yeah, anybody like that, yeah.
Back to even like I know we've mentioned Garvey a few times. I like how in the book you kind of, you know, debunk some misconceptions about Garvey. If you kind of could talk about, you know, some of those misconceptions, one of them being that, you know, Garvey was for capitalism or like a pro-capitalist, essentially. You know, if you kind of could dive into that and, you know, kind of reiterate some of the same points you said in the book for our viewers.
Yeah, Garvey was first and foremost a nationalist, but he wasn't against socialism. In fact, he even wrote there's correspondence between him and the Bolsheviks when Lenin and them came to power. Garvey was very laudatory about what they were doing, and he has a long history of being involved in workers' movements, labor movements while he was in Jamaica. You know, it was. I mean, he wasn't the kind of, you know, literate socialist that C.L.R. James and Padmore and them all who had been studying Marxism. But you know, the problem for him was that he was attacked by the left. The same Marxists who we talked about earlier, he didn't appreciate, you know, nationalism and the African particularity and envy and jealousy. Garvey had the masses, he had the workers. And so his attack wasn't so much against socialists, but against those on the left, socialists, left, black, white, who were attacking him. But again, he's not he's not so clear about all the class contradictions. So you can see statements he made about we need our own Rockefeller, we need our own, that kind of thing. But they can be taken out of context. Because when Garvey talked about sending people back to Africa, he wasn't talking about one group or lording over another. He was his terminology and his dialogue, his discussion, his writings, his speeches sound very socialistic. Yeah, in terms of we share the wealth and that everybody should have equal opportunity. That's all what socialism is talking about. So people take one little statement he may have made and make him into a black capitalist, but I didn't see it at all. I don't see it with Garvey at all. Yeah, he was first and foremost for workers. Yeah. And the workers followed. They were in support of him.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to kind of double back on one of the things we were saying about Sadiq Ture, I think also too with the question of Zionism, I think that could be something I think he expanded on from Nkrumah, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I guess with that, I know you have actual works. I know you wrote in a piece, in an article about Zionism and the history of Pan-Africanism. If you kind of can lay out some of that history in relation to Pan-Africanism and Zionism and, how it's transformed and what were some misunderstandings, misnomers, and also, just overall, just the history of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Zionism for a long time was misunderstood by many leaders and activists in the Pan-African movement. They did a great job in propagandizing their cause. They were organized even in the late 19th century. Their congresses were meeting every year. Even the national anthem of Israel came out of their congresses. Yeah, it just shows you that those congresses were always thinking nation states, and they just did a good job of propagandizing. And then because the Zionist movement was led by those of European origin, they were, aligning themselves with imperialism, and imperialism always saw them as kind of as collaborators in what they could do in the Middle East, especially when oil was discovered. So for years, because of the African community that's based in Christianity, and by using biblical references, it just was confusion. So, and almost without exceptions, it's not until Nkrumah, that you get some understanding of what Zionism is to some degree. But Du Bois was confused on it. Padmore was confused on it. If you look at the readings, Garvey, they all spoke in favorable terms to Zionism and have compared the Pan-Africanism to Zionism. But in the article that I wrote, I tried to show that that's a big mistake. That Zionism is, from its beginning, has been just designed to remove Palestinians from their land and to create a nation state for these Europeans who became Jews. Judaism was spread, not just the Jews. Judaism as a religion, and so the point is that because you become a Jew, you don't get any land out of it. If I'm a Muslim, there's no land comes. If I'm a Christian, you get no land, and you're a Jew, there's no land. If you look at Zion, if you study it properly, it's a covenant. You're returning to a community of beliefs, but not to physical land. And this Abraham, who they claim, God promised to the land, he himself is not even from Israel, Palestine. He's from somewhere, I forget the country, but it's near Iraq. So the whole thing is it's mythology. And so Nkrumah never really talked about it much. And early on in the Nkrumah, in early government, I went through the archives and went through the CPP minutes and all. And Israel was very close to Ghana, and Ghana had a very close relationship with Israel in the early period from 57 to early 60s, kind of. But it was the Palestinian community, in particular, and the Arab community in general, which kind of shed some light to Nkrumah. And Nkrumah wanted to unite the whole continent, was impacted by NASA and others. Some of the Egyptians were critical early on of Israel's relationship with Ghana. And, Nkrumah always evolving and developing, eventually became very critical of Israel's Zionism and aligned himself with the Palestinian cause. He was one of the first persons, if not the first person, to talk about the two-state solution that he espoused at the UN, and just, became closer with the Palestinians. He provided monies for the Palestinian refugees, and of course married the Egyptian woman. So, but he's the first one. He did the parts. All the other Pan-Africanists, with the exception of Malcolm. Of course, Malcolm's was more anti-Jewish than anti-Zionism. Yeah, kind of. But he was still anti-Zionist. But the rest of them, almost without exception, they were very favorable to Zionism. Yeah. And then you mentioned about Sadiq Ture. Yeah, Sadiq Ture also he's also very clear on the Palestinian cause. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thanks. And then also, I guess in relation to that same question, I know you were pretty close with John Henrik Clarke. If you kind of could shed light on some of his some of his views on Zionism and just his role in how he's instrumental in your life, essentially just overall as well.
Well, I didn't know. I mean, I was teaching at Fisk for my first 4 years of teaching, and we brought him at Fisk. We brought him to Fisk. We brought what's his name? His counterpart. What's his Dr. Ben? Yeah, Johanna to Fisk. And so let's see. I was trying to edit a book on Malcolm. I think it was 25 years after Malcolm was 65. Maybe it must have been his assassination. Let's see, 65, 75, 85, 90. Yeah, it must have been, yeah. And so I was trying to edit the book on and then Spike Lee's movie was coming out and all that kind of thing. And so the book never happened, but I did get some of the articles. And I wanted John Henrik Clarke to do the forward, and he did. He sent the forward to me. So I called him on the phone. And so when I was talking to him about the book on Malcolm, he sent it for us, a powerful forward. I just never got the book. I was expressing to him the difficulty I was having with publishing this book that I wrote on Pan-Africanism and Zionism. One publisher had it for about a year, and then it went out of print, and nobody wanted to touch it. It's such a sensitive subject. And even I had an article on it, and it was in the Western Journal of Black Studies. He loved the guy, the editor, I forget his name. He loved it, but he was afraid of it because he spent some time in Libya under Gaddafi, and when he came back, he caught hell. And so eventually, Journal of Black Studies, this guy, what's his name, at Temple, he published it. And I give him credit for that. I forget the Afrocentric guy. Yeah, he published it. But so I was discussing this with John Henrik Clarke, and he told me to just put it on a shelf and don't publish it, because these people were so powerful and they were going to damage. They were going to, I'm an upcoming, young scholar, and he said they will mess your whole career up. So he told me, don't publish it. Just put it on a shelf and lecture from it. That's what he told me. And so it kind of frightened me. Here's a senior telling me, that, because it's important work. And sure enough, I mean, that same article that I published, I was in Boston in Simmons College, and my first wife, she was teaching at Brandeis. And one of the students, she used that article, and one of the students gave it to her mother. Brandeis is a heavily Zionist Jewish kind of school, and the mother read the article and wrote the president at Simmons College and told, and I got the letter, said that this man shouldn't be teaching at Simmons College. He should be sacked. He's anti-Semitic, blah, blah, blah. So it just so happened I was tenured, and that president at Simmons was new and couldn't do anything. And moreover, the head of my department, sociology, happened to be Jewish, but also anti-Zionist. So she didn't have, but if in a different circumstances would have been different. I wasn't tenured. The head of my department was, and so it kind of reinforced what Clarke said. So that's partly why I said, okay, I'm going to publish it because it's important work, but I'll use Toks Adewale as the same way George Padmore is a different name. Everybody got Ross McConn. They all have kind of different, names. Just to kind of, not that you can't hide from these people, but that was the kind of inspiration. I'll give it a different name, which is the name I always use anyway. My friends and colleagues always knew me. People who mattered in my life knew me as Toks Adewale. And that was kind of the thing behind using Toks Adewale as opposed to my slave, Michael Williams. John Henrik Clarke was so adamant that, no, my brother, don't publish it, brother. Just go ahead, and lecture from it. Just put it on the shelf because these people will destroy you. And they do that. They just destroy people, man. Careers. This guy, Tony Martin, I don't know if you ever heard it. He taught it at this thing when I was in Boston. He wrote a thing called The Jewish Something. And he used Farrakhan's book. The Nation of Islam had a thing on the contribution of the Jews to the slave trade. And, man, they hit him left, right, and center. Yeah, so that's where that came from, yeah.
Appreciate that. And I guess maybe if you could kind of just speak about Zionist impact or Zionism's impact on Africa and possibly even other colonized nations, but, with a heavy emphasis on Africa, and how it affects it. Because some people, may say, Zionist is just, a Palestinian struggle. What do we have to do with it? I'm a Pan-Africanist. It has nothing to do with us. But as you stated earlier, with dialectics and the interrelation of things, kind of just speak on that and, give us your view on it.
Yeah, the Zionists have always been undermining progressive heads of states, progressive leaders, and organizations all over the world. They have a secret service that's as even more pernicious than the CIA and all of them. Of course, their role in maintaining up, reinforcing, strengthening, supporting the apartheid regime is clear and is fully well documented. But that's just kind of what they do. The other thing, like Martin Luther King, Dr. King said, oppression anywhere is a threat to oppression everywhere. So it's that same kind of concept. So what they're doing to the Palestinians is what they've done to us. But they just have been major supporters of neo-colonialism, and they still are. And, I don't know if you follow the AU, allowed them to give some kind of observer status. It was so shameful. But if you look at it, it's the most reactionary leaders who were prepared to let them in. What's his name? Haiti was denied membership into the AU, but yet you give these people who have a history of undermining, we don't know the specific role, but they were part of the coup d'etat. And Nkrumah lists them as part of the forces that led to the coup d'etat in Ghana. It's their what do you call it? Their intelligence service. So it's just one element of imperialism. And because they have the nuclear capacity, they become even more dangerous. But they just have a history of undermining progressive movements and people. But because of the propaganda and you got a lot of preachers and pastors who are always kind of pulling out biblical reference, they don't get the full condemnation that other imperialist nations get. They still kind of are protected by that level of confusion that has engulfed what they do.
Exactly. And I think for people who say, oh, you're criticizing Zionists, you're just picking on the Jewish people, blah blah. Like the issue isn't like Jewish people or anything, because we know that
Right.
like Jewish people like still they're getting oppressed and so forth, and not especially depending on the circumstances and location, and it's a matter of the fact that it's basically another arm of imperialist state. That's the big thing. I think if people point that out, that's a big thing. And because like you were talking about earlier, talks about how they present itself as another liberation movement, but maybe a liberation movement if all you're doing is basically working in the role for imperialist powers, like whether it's the UK. The UK for the Balfour Declaration, or right now the U.S. is basically the U.S. is basically the father of like Israel right now. So I think that's one thing people have to understand.
Yeah, in fact, you're so correct. It's not about Jews at all, because one of the most adamant opponents of Zionism are Jews. It's a group in particular called the AJAZ, American Jews Against Zionism, or Jews. Sometimes it's just called Jazz, Jews Against Zionism. They're the most. I mean, much of what I learned about Zionism came from Jews who are proper Jews. It's a religion, and you get no land out of it. But these guys, AJAZ, American Jews Against Zionism, these guys are very, very clear. Yeah, so it's not about Judaism at all.
Yeah, speaking of the AU, African Union, and them trying to give Israel different rights, whatever, where do you see the nature of Pan-Africanism today, and where do you see it possibly going?
Oh, well, it's just amongst the masses. Our leaders are not really strong opponents or advocates of Pan-Africanism. It's a class impediment. They're not passionate about it. They don't care. It's a kind of go slow, similar to that of AU or OAU. They've created this African Continental Free Trade area, but that's just part of the problem, trade. And so I think it's amongst the masses. That's all. You look at Mali. I know you guys had asked some issues about Mali. It's the masses who they want to reject French imperialism. And so it's we have to, I think our future lies amongst workers and farmers and women and youth, students. But so I think Pan-Africanism has great prospects for being realized. But it's just going to take, organized effort to reach those people who have a real interest in Pan-Africanism. If we rely on the heads of states and these ministers to deliver Pan-Africanism, we'll be waiting a long time. But the contradictions for me are becoming so acute that the issues are becoming clearer. And again, these recent coups and movements and protests in Mali in particular, I think helped to show that the ordinary people kind of really understand the issues. They just don't have an opportunity to give voice to it. But sometimes it comes out. So I'm very optimistic. Some of the young people in Africa, yes, they are really, you can see it. There's a lot of young organizations and young people who are really understanding it. So we just got to create the organizational opportunities for them to understand it. But it's and the women I mentioned earlier, these women, some of the women are just really grasping hold of it. So it's a great time for me. It's a great time for Pan-Africanism. Yeah.
Indeed, and another point with talk about the youth is that Africa is the young, like by medium age, is the youngest continent. So right. We get to organize. Look at us go.
Yep.
That's so true. Yeah. I guess just to talk about other just geopolitics in relation to Africa. I guess what is your view on not only Africa's current relations with with China and other nations part of the global South, and then also how the current Ukraine and Russia conflict may have an impact on Africans. As we've seen, Africans that lived in Ukraine have issues, leaving the country, things of that nature, and being, brutalized or whatever the case is, right? Like, if you kind of could just go into that.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of ground. Countries have their own sovereign interests. We just, because we're not united, we don't define our sovereign interests. I don't think people talk about China's being the same as, China's relationship with Africa being the same as the industrial North. I don't see it that way historically and even in a contemporary way. But China is definitely pursuing its own sovereign interests, and you can't blame it. But if we, too weak and divided and lack appreciation to protect our own, anybody will come and take advantage of it. And China got real, genuine needs. And so if some of the relationships between China and Africa are not complete in our favor, it's our own fault because of our division. And anybody will take advantage of that. So I'm not kind of anti-China. I don't see it that way. China has done a lot of good. And it's, when they provide loans and assistance, it's not the same. The conditions that the West impose on Africa is not what China imposes. The West, if you give you money, they want you to think like them, do like them, vote for them, that kind of thing. And China, so it's a different relationship I see that China has with Africa that the industrial North has with Africa. But it's just, it's us. We just, because we're not organized, by all means, people will continue to mistreat us. So that thing in Ukraine is just reinforces that we're not respected. I mean, it's horrible. You see them guys trying to leave, folks from West Africa, East Africa trying to leave and telling them, get off the train. You can't, wait and all that kind of thing. I mean, it's just horrendous. Or can't travel at all. But I don't Ukraine. I don't see. I don't see us trying to attack Russia or condemning Russia in the way that the industrial North is condemning Russia. Russia is pursuing its own interests. All nations do that, and they don't feel comfortable with being surrounded by NATO. The U.S. wouldn't allow for it. They wouldn't allow for the Canada and Mexico to become, enemies or become part of it. They just wouldn't allow it. And in fact, the Monroe Doctrine, which they still keep reminding people of, was issued in 1824. I think the U.S. wasn't even 50 years old, and they declared the Monroe Doctrine that the whole Western Hemisphere belonged to them. Anybody come and interfere with it, it's going to be war. And they've been defending that position from since then, 1824. So I think we should neutral look and study it and see how it affects us. It will affect trade because we were involved in, it's going to the supply side of not supply side, but I forget the term, but it's going to affect. Yeah, it's already affecting. Yeah, imports. Because we import everything, and the value added, not value added. I can't think of the term, but it's affecting trade. It is, but that's only because we import everything. Yeah, supplies. I'm still missing the term. So
trade deficit or
no, it's But anyway, it's affecting. Yeah, the war in Ukraine is affecting some countries in Africa, but not in a devastating way. And the whole thing is so hypocritical. I mean, the U.S. and the industrial North, they don't respect anybody's sovereignty or democracy if it doesn't impact them. And then 54, they came and overthrew, 53, they overthrew their democratic elected government in Iran because the president was ready to nationalize oil. They did the same thing in 64 and in Guatemala, and then in Chile, and it's just a history of not respecting sovereignty and democracy. And so, in terms of what's going on currently in Ukraine, we just have to look and see this is what these people do, and just unite. It's all about, that's what the book in Pan-African Imperative. We got to unite, and then we'll decide, what's in our own sovereign interest. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I guess for you, just in general, is there anything, I know you just, this book just came out not too long ago. Is there anything else up and coming for you? I'm not gonna lie. I heard about that Malcolm book. I'm like, man, are you going to look to try to publish that at some point? Or is there any other things that you're going to be working on personally? Or
I would love to do that. I have, I had some people who were contributing to it. Manny Marble was supposed to, but he wrote that book on Malcolm, which wasn't good. So I'm not sure. Right now, I'm looking at maybe some essays that kind of look at the contemporary world more. So that's what I'm working on now. Yeah, some series of kind of critical essays. Just everything for me. Everything is, and it's just Pan-Africanism. That's all I'm interested in, is uniting the continent, uniting our people. That to me is what we have to do, but along socialist lines. But to remove socialism from Pan-Africanism, which often happens, is a big mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess with that, I guess one of my last questions would be, you may have some diasporan Africans who may say, oh, like, what does unifying Africa have to do with me? If you kind of could just speak from a Nkrumah standpoint, or just even a general standpoint on how the unification of Africa affects Africans all over the world and their well-being.
Yeah, well, land is the basis of everything. It's about dignity and respect, and until the continent is united, we'll never get to respect, and that's everything. But for me, we only have one home. Diasporans have to see, where's the dignity and respect? We were forced out, and we have only one home. What Kwame Ture made the point that should be your dying wish to get home, unless you're just so confused, you've been so brainwashed. That should be your dying wish to get home where you were taken from. Somebody is stolen and forced out. You should be wanting not only to get back but to make sure that home is well taken care of and defended. So yeah, I don't see any solution besides diasporans contributing to the continent's liberation, and we've done that historically. I don't know, maybe because I'm here, I live here, and I couldn't imagine ever living anywhere else. Maybe there's some hope over there to do something, but I don't see it. I think all of our hope and future is tied up with Africa. Once Africa is united and strong, socialist, it can defend its people wherever we are. Right now, we just at the mercy of wherever we are. We at the mercy. Nobody can protect us and defend us. And so United Africa will be in a position to defend its people, unlike any other nation has defended its people. Yeah. But it can happen only when the diaspora continues to make that contribution. To the AU's credit, is 6 regions. One of the regions is the diaspora. And we got to push that hard, and make sure that we're an integral part of everything that happens. It ties to identity, dignity, respect. I don't think you can have it unless you recognize who you are and where you're from. Yeah.
Yes, I speak that because we've had a couple of interviews with people who are that even though they understand the importance of Africa and Africans, they also their focus has been more on building a new Africa here in the United States. And but do you see any like the distance between doing that and of building or unifying socialist Africa?
Yeah, I don't see any. The U.S. is just stolen land. I can't see why we would want to concentrate creating something new on land that was stolen. I just don't see it. We should, I think, concentrate on where, your struggle has to always be principled. And the principal thing is for us to, claim Africa. And that's happening. I mean, that's the beauty of it. More diasporans are coming to Africa and see it. I mean, when I moved here in '94, you hardly saw anybody from the diaspora. Now, I mean, you can't, these people, I mean, everybody is up and coming here. So that's a beautiful thing. People are coming to see it now. I mean, one of the nice things, I guess, about Trump and all this kind of thing, he make people to see what the U.S. is really about. So I have no doubt that people are going to come and return to the source. It's just a natural thing. When you wake up, that has to be part of your awakening. Africa is, man, it's beautiful. I'm telling you, brother, once you get a taste for Africa, you don't want to. Africa is just, I just can't even describe it, brother. Africa is everything, man. And it's so wealthy, and people are so beautiful. I mean, not that it's, I don't want to even romanticize it, but you feel differently when you're here. It's a lot of problems. We have our own mess, but it's our mess, and you can solve it, that kind of thing. Whereas over there, I don't know. You're dealing with a lot of mad people, man, and just, it's just madness. I don't know what, you come here and it's different. Like you said earlier, Ivan, the youth, it's so much youth here. We just such a young, so we can shape and it's beautiful. The culture is so beautiful. The people have respect. The young people, I just can't even describe it. I can't even describe it.
So, I can't wait to go home. I can't wait to go back.
Yeah. So we just got to protect it, because otherwise, they come and, all this globalization will come and spoil the place.
Yeah. I guess one of the questions I have, I guess, what would be some of the contradictions on some Africans? Because, some Africans are going there to try to build some type of in their mind, like a capitalist empire. And, there's contradictions when they come there. They just, looking to exploit. Yeah, exactly. Looking to exploit or get rich and stuff like that, instead of building, revolutionary movements or institutions and stuff like that. Can you kind of just give a take on, have you seen that? And, just speak on some of those contradictions too.
Yeah, I see. We just have to expose them. It's similar. Those who are coming here with that notion, but you got those who are also here. You got people. It's a propaganda. You got some millionaires, multi-millionaires, and people act like they're just so great, so wonderful. They get, who's that guy? I think he's a Nigerian, one of the wealthiest people in the world. They always portray them like they're just so wonderful. There's a woman in South Africa also, So it's just how they are portrayed. Not only those who are coming, but those who are here, pushing capitalism and pushing, all this multi-millionaire, status. So it's a problem. It's a global problem. The wealth gap is just increasing more and more. And some of these diasporans come here with that notion, but we just have to expose them. So organization is everything, just because it provides education and awakening and political awareness. But I see it. It's a real threat. I see it. They come in here with all kind of notions and just these super millionaires and billionaires are portrayed as if that's the solution. They create all kind of organizations for entrepreneurship, for young people seeing this is the way, let me just get a business and make a whole bunch of money, employ people, and that kind of plan of action. And so we just got to find a way to oppose it.
Well, we appreciate you joining us today and having this conversation. I definitely thoroughly enjoyed this episode and doing it. And maybe we could have you back for part 2 at some point. As you put out more stuff and do more things and more conversations around.
I'm so sorry about my, but you can see I have gray hair on my hair. I'll work on this thing. Yeah, but I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I look forward to seeing you guys, on the continent at some point, either in Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, wherever. But you're always welcome in Ghana. Feel free. Let me know. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can help you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. But before we go all the way to conclude, just wanted to plug in our other podcasts as well. We also have the Forward Ever podcast on Spotify. We also have our New Mexico chapter as well, of Revolutionary African Women, and also our ancestors' voices. So be on the lookout for those. We have the links in the descriptions, and all the books I named that Toks Adewale has written. I'll also put that in the description as well if you guys want to purchase one. And also, don't forget to cop some A-APRP gear at the Forward Ever shop. Please be sure to support our work and, in the same time, look fly doing it. So, we appreciate you guys.
And don't forget to join an organization. We have our link, and we'll have our link in the description. If you're interested in joining A-APRP, you can do that there. Also have other allied organizations that do so as well. And if none of those are interested in you always start your own. Just talk to people around you. Talk about your housing, your workplace, your school, or wherever. It's like do that. Like, or even people on the street, like you see what's happening around people on the street. Maybe someone's incarcerated. So talk to the people and organize. So
definitely, join the organization. But other than that, we appreciate you guys tuning in again for another episode of the Pantsula Podcast. I hope to catch you guys next Monday and Forward Ever.
Forward.